Showcasing local talent, professionals, and everyday people making Salt Lake City what it is today. It's time for another episode of the I Am Salt Lake podcast.
Welcome back to the I Am Salt Lake podcast, episode 94. My name is Chris Hollifield. Welcome to the podcast where I introduce you to locals, professionals, everyday people in Salt Lake City that are making the city what it is today. So thank you so much for joining me, especially if this is your first time. IamSaltLake.com is a website. Got all the information right there, all the previous episodes. You can listen, stream them, and download them directly from the website. So thank you for listening. This episode, I sat down with local author Alison Lee. We sat down and chatted about her most recent and first publication that she wrote, her first book, Slut, S-L-U-T. What a great acronym. Anyways, we sat down, we talked about her book, what inspired her to write it, kind of how she got into writing, her as an individual growing up here in Salt Lake City. We talked about how when she first had to expose the book to her family and friends, what that was like for her to deal with. It was a really great conversation. You can find out all about her at AlisonLeeAuthor.com. I'm going to put all the links on the show notes, episode 94. So anyways, Alison Lee came over to my apartment. We sat down, we chatted about the book and her as a person. Great conversation. It's a great book if you get a chance to pick it up. It's on Amazon. I'm going to put the links on the website as well that you can get the book. I'm just going to read just a quick line here from the back of the book, give you a little bit of taste of what the book's all about. Sophisticated, funny, and deliciously erotic. The first book in this captivating series follows three young women navigating the modern culture clash playing out in historically conservative but increasingly progressive Salt Lake City. Join me now as I talk to Alison Lee, the author of the book, and we get to know her just a little bit better. Why don't we kind of just start right at the beginning of what got you interested in writing?
Okay.
Like, how long have you been writing for?
So all my life I've been writing. My older sister and my best friend and I, the Christmas I turned 12, we actually asked my mom for a typewriter. And we would sit in the basement and we would type up these ridiculous investigative stories. And then we would act them out like CSI 7th grade. And we would come up with characters and backstories and little clues that we would tuck in. And only one of us would ever know the real outcome. And then we would, play these elaborate imaginative games and they would go on for hours. And then we would continue to write up the stories. And too old to be playing make-believe, really, but we just loved it. And we were putting our allowance into buying ribbon for the typewriter and buying correction tape and like walking over to Shopco to get more typing paper. And we didn't want the stuff on the computer because the stories were so outrageous and inappropriate that we didn't want to get busted with what we were writing. We wanted to be able to just really let sort of that imagination run. So
you've always kind of had that creative mind and just always wanting to get it down on paper and just expressing yourself through the art of writing.
It's interesting because when I was young, we would write so much and really enjoyed it. And then went to college here at the University of Utah. And
did you go to school for writing then? Or
no. So I went to the University of Utah actually on a debate scholarship. So then your writing switches and it becomes very political. And it's all about researching security policy in Southeast Asia or researching, what is happening right now, U.S. News and World Report, or what are people talking about in economic policy. And then you're writing so much for school that I stopped writing and you outgrow it and you stop making up stories.
You just got kind of burned out of it.
Yeah, I got so wrapped up in what you need to do to get through the day. But as a women's studies major, you also get to do a lot of writing that is political in nature. And you get to, I think, be a little bit more mouthy than you would be maybe at the University of Utah as a history major or an econ major. But one thing I found was that it seemed that so much of studying women's studies, which was my major at the time, didn't allow for the feminine, that it was very androgynous, and that you could only talk about women as sort of equal to men, but you couldn't talk about women as different from men. And it certainly wasn't accepted to talk about regular heterosexual interests and relationships and passions and things like that. It just wasn't popular. It wasn't the way people were talking. People were talking about rejecting this culture where we're all forced into heterosexual relationships and aprons and kitchens and making babies.
Do you think that's more because of Utah in general or as a society?
I think at the time it was really where the academic approach was going in feminism, that it just wasn't the field. It wasn't what people were talking about. And then I discovered this movement called fifth wave feminism. I call it Martha Stewart feminism, which is this idea that I can say not only are women equal, but women can also throw like girls and run like girls and wear lipstick and put on pearls and want to play Barbies when they're little and can still say that that is equal to being a man. And for so long, we had been told, well, if you want to be equal, then really what you need to be is androgynous.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that. Because, I mean, I don't think that there's anything wrong with dressing up and you know, makeup and stuff like that. But I think so often we kind of think, you know, oh, well, women just belong over here and men belong over there.
Well, and I think then you arrive in a place, or if you do arrive in a place where you want to consider yourself sort of politically forward thinking, that has an appearance too. That means that you grow your leg hair and wear a hippie skirt. And in Utah, our culture, in Utah, our culture is so much that, you know, on June 4th, you get out the vatch of bleach and you color your hair and you dress up like a girl. And our culture is very feminine for women. And so if you grow up within that very feminine culture and then you want to study feminist theory up at the University of Utah, they're so diametrically opposed that you can't be who you were at 14 and be who you're trying to be at 21. And I found that really frustrating.
I could imagine. Yeah. I could imagine.
So I ended up moving more into sociology courses, which then you get to take more human sexuality and criminology. And my sister and I both took positions as victims advocates. So some awful crime happens. A woman is battered, or a person is a victim of sexual violence, or you have a child who's molested, and the police come and they take the report and they deal with the criminal aspect, and then they leave, and now this victim is left to sort of put the pieces back together. And that's when victim advocates come in and they talk about the resources that are available and how this person can now heal and recover and move on. And she and I did that for a number of years and really had an opportunity to be exposed to people that, you know, your typical suburban Salt Lake upbringing never introduces you to.
Yeah.
I got called to a trailer park one night where a man had taken too much meth and actually stabbed himself and held his family hostage in a trailer for the evening. And the police went in thinking this man had left, and I was there. I happened to be on a ride along, and we all thought that the man was gone because those were the reports that had been given. So the men walked up to the front door. There's noise in the backyard. I go around to the back of the trailer, and there's this guy standing with a knife in his arm, gushing blood everywhere. Yeah, he's still there. And so, you know, I had never been exposed to anything like that. I had no idea what to do. And I discovered that my response is to completely freeze. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I didn't do anything. I just stood there. And fortunately, then the police came around and he was arrested, and we spent the evening talking with this woman. And, but experiences like that opened my mind to, we don't all live in Salt Lake and either belong to, you live in the suburbs and you go to church on Sunday, or you don't live in Salt Lake, but you're kind of peripherally involved. That just as much as anywhere you would find people in all walks, you get that here in Salt Lake.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think even though I had grown up sort of fringe Mormon.
And you grew, now backing up a little bit, you grew up here in Utah, in Salt Lake City.
So I say that I'm ethnically Mormon. My people were one of the first 100 families that arrived in Salt Lake in 1847, camped out at First Encampment Park.
Deep roots.
Deep roots here in Zion. Yes. And as much as I'm proud of the great like underground culture that we have here of, arts and music and progressive philosophy, I also love my hand cart stock. I love that there were people who believed something so much. They're like, we're going to load everything we own into a hand cart and we're going to push it across the country. And then we're going to come to this desert in the middle of nowhere and we're going to build a society just based off of something we believe.
Yeah. I mean, that takes a certain kind of person to do that, really.
Yeah. I've never believed in anything that much that I would even walk 10 miles, let alone uproot my entire family and take them across the country. And it wasn't like then they would arrive here and there was a nice condo waiting for them. Then the work got started.
Yeah. They had to, build this whole valley.
Right.
Really.
When it's going to be, freezing cold and 3 feet of snow in the winter and it's going to be 100 degrees in the summer. And then you're going to have rattlesnakes and bears.
So do you have any relation to any of the prophets or anything like that? I mean, have you done your genealogy to that?
I have done my genealogy. So,
do you have any rad ancestors? I don't know. Come on here.
My rad ancestors were Murray people. So they were, like I said, part of that first 100 families who came across the valley. Just big polygamists, though. No prophets. I guess God doesn't speak to us.
Do you still have polygamy that runs in your family at all?
I don't believe we've had any polygamy since, I believe, 5 generations ago. It's been a long time.
Well, so anyways, we're here. Your book, you wrote a book. We're kind of maybe jumping forward a little bit. Slut, right?
Right. Slut.
That is when did that come out? Jumping forward, I guess, a little bit, what inspired you to write this book, and how long did that take you to do, or what? Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the book.
So I think the book was percolating for a long time.
Okay.
Because it came from this place where in college I got frustrated with traditional feminism, that it was so much of a mindset that you did need to be a little bit androgynous and you needed to have certain mindsets. And then growing up in Utah, there are so many judgments of each other that we assume that this person who grows up in this LDS home and mom and dad go to church on Sunday and you're there and your skirt's the right length, you're this person. And this other family that lives next door, we assume an entirely different story about them because the dad mows the lawn with no shirt on. And so it was always there in my mind, the way people here label each other when we really know nothing. I mean, you can have the woman who sits next to you in Sunday school who's also a cocaine addict.
Yeah, you don't know what goes on behind closed doors.
You have no idea what goes on behind closed doors. And then you'll hear these stories about these families that you thought were so quintessentially LDS, and their story and their experience is so different from that. So that had always kind of been in my mind. And I grew up in a very unique home where sex was not a bad word.
Which is rare for Utah.
It's very rare for Utah. When I was 3, I had this babysitter who came over to our house and told my older sister and I all of these dirty jokes. And so we were too young to even know they were dirty. So my mom gets home and now we're telling my mom these dirty jokes. And she's like, shit, now I got to deal with this. So she gave us the birds and bees talk when we were really too young.
And about how old were you?
I was 3.
Oh, 3 years old.
3 years old.
Being told dirty jokes.
Yes. Oh, what an inappropriate babysitter, right?
Yeah.
But my mom had no choice now. She's got to sort of clean up the record. So she tells us what this is really about. And I was too young to understand that telling someone this story is really uncomfortable for adults. And I was too young to understand that then I should be embarrassed to ask questions, And so we created this relationship at a very young age where I could ask any question about sex that came to my mind. And
with your parents? With
my parents. And my parents would blush bright red and they would answer the question. So then in 5th grade and 6th grade, when people start joking on the playground, I was always the one who said, no, that's not how it works. Here's actually how it goes. And so there was always this joke with my friends. They called me Dr. Ruth.
Oh, because I wasn't. Who doesn't love Dr. Ruth, though, right?
Everybody wants Dr. Ruth at a party.
Yeah.
But I was never the person who was uncomfortable about sexuality. And in Utah, that makes you very rare. So there was always that sort of in the back of my mind. And we had this core group of friends in high school, 4 girlfriends and I, and then this group of guys that hung out a lot. And in 2011, I was at a luncheon, the Utah Women in Technology luncheon. And I'm sitting there with this table of women, and we're listening to all these great accomplishments of all these women. And we're joking and we're laughing that we had no idea that Utah was full of such powerful, smart, accomplished women. That we thought they were all making zucchini bread, but they're not. They're out there running corporations and getting PhDs and inventing things. And my phone started blowing up. And it's friends from high school, friends I haven't talked to in 10 years. And even a girlfriend who now lives in Paris, who there are scenes in the book that take place in Paris. And one of my characters is actually this French man. And I would write these dirty scenes with this French man. And he's like dirty talking to this character. But now I have to check it. And, dirty talk is something it isn't something you learn as a second language. It's something you know naturally. So she would forward the articles or the posts or the whatever it was that I was working on that day, the chapters, onto her boyfriend. And her boyfriend would critique my French dirty talk and send it back to me. So I know now the next time I see him, I'm just going to blush bright red and be too embarrassed to even look at him. But so my phone is blowing up. And then I get this call from this girlfriend in Paris. And I know it's the middle of the night where she is. So I can tell something's going wrong. And I step out of the luncheon and I answer the phone, and a friend of ours that we had grown up with all our life had died unexpectedly, tragically, had taken his life. And I was so shocked by that information. And it didn't hurt like it would hurt in the context of a friend you grew up with who killed himself. It hurt as if it had happened when we were 17. And I went home and I was just so upset at the idea that this would be how his story would end. And for a few days, I just was in just a fog, couldn't even process, thought this must be a mistake, somehow this is wrong. And then as we got closer and closer to the funeral, I just wanted to be able to remember him as I had known him. So I sat down and I wrote a couple of paragraphs, and they were purely just for me. Just, I want to remember who I knew back then. And it was almost that I didn't want for his only legacy to be how he had died. I wanted there to be something out there that even if I was the only person that remembered it, that I knew it was there. And then the words kept coming. And then I started feeling like, I don't want that to be how his story ends. I want him to have a different story. And I just kept writing and kept writing. And I think that night probably went to bed with, 20, 30 pages, which from having not really written for years to now, all of a sudden one night I had written all of these pages and just kind of vomit, just whatever I was thinking. And there was no plan to it and nowhere it was going. And went to the funeral, and we got talking with a group of friends. Some of them who had been friends of mine, some of who had been friends of his, and just sharing perceptions. And it was so interesting what the perspective was of all of these different people now, give them 10, 15 years and their adult lives. And what people thought had been the reality when we were 17 was completely different. And I got home, and I happened to be going to China for a couple of weeks right after that. And so you've got a 14-hour flight to China, and I was going to be in China all by myself for 2 weeks. And I just decided I wanted to write, like I said, I wanted to write him a different ending. And I kept writing and kept writing. And the one thing I could never get to was a happy ending for him. It was interesting. No matter how I thought of his life and no matter how I tried to sort of slant the truth of his experience, I could never see him in a different way. In fact, I'll read a little excerpt from that.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
The fact that Carrick's life had ended before I ever gained closure or one last cup of coffee or more than just a chat and a business card in a crowded parking lot hurts me to my core. I haven't been sleeping well or eating well or living well since I heard the news. But truthfully, I never saw him holding a baby or a young blonde wife or an Academy Award and thanking me for believing in him. But I always thought that somehow we'd have one last conversation and that we'd resolve what was. But instead, all that misspent teenage angst was flushed away at the shot of a gun without even a bad tattoo to show for it.
It's awesome.
Yeah, and it just coming to that realization that no matter how I wanted to recreate his story, I was not able to see for him that. Because when I had known him when he was young, part of what we all loved about him was that he very much was of that live fast, die young, live a beautiful corpse mentality.
Which everybody could learn from a lot.
They really
could.
Yeah, there really is something very beautiful and brave in being able to be the person who lives for right then. Now, we can't all do it, and we shouldn't all do it, and he left a lot of pain in his wake. But he also had always been very honest about who he was. And I think because of that, and because of his fearlessness, I didn't actually want to take away from him that he decided that things were done. And he wasn't married, and he didn't have children, and he hadn't made promises. And so as painful as it is for everyone around him, it isn't our choice to make. But I didn't want his memory to be this sad thing. I wanted it to be like the badass that I had known. So I decided to create now this universe where ultimately his story will be heroic. And so built out this person that was him.
And so you captured it in the book. I mean, what would you say would you say it's kind of about his life, or what would you say the book itself for people listening?
So it's interesting. It started with him as an inspiration.
Okay.
But then as I was building out that piece of him as a character, who I really relate to and who I know would be women growing up in Utah. So instead, he became a friend to these women who grow up in Utah. And it became really a girlfriend's piece and a piece of growing up in Utah and developing one's sexual identity in this valley where there are so many labels placed on who you are and how you behave.
It's hard to create that sexual identity here. I mean, I would imagine. I didn't grow up here, but right. I would imagine it'd be tough.
So one of the things that was so interesting, we were at his funeral and we were talking with friends, and he had come from such a different place when he and I became friends. And then it sort of merged these two groups where my group of friends, very straight-laced, white-bread, wholesome, sandy Utah blonde girls.
Yeah.
And his group of friends, they were very much the misfits. And so then when we merged these two worlds, it was very weird to people. And they were sort of like, one of these kids is not like the other. It didn't quite fit. And it was confusing to people. And one of his friends at the funeral had said that me growing up, that I always seemed like I didn't care what people thought of me, which was so wrong. It was that I'm so aware of what people think of me that you create this persona of not caring. And to unite these two worlds, the misfits with the wholesome Utah girls, was just funny to me. And it was play acting, and it was entertaining.
I could imagine. Yeah.
Because then it's all of these questions and stories and, well, is it that they're really not who we think they are? Or is it that you're not really who we think you are? It's fun to get tongues wagging in Salt Lake City.
Excuse me.
So as I'm thinking through all of these elements, there's one thing that happens for me anyway, when I would sit down to write, that there was the truth. And then sometimes you slant the truth just to get through a page, or in order to explain something, or in order to give context to something in a more efficient way. Because I was just purely writing for the fun of writing, I didn't care too much about the truth. It was...
Your end goal wasn't... Did you know, okay, this is eventually going to be a book, or you were just kind of writing?
I was just writing.
Yeah.
And I had no plan for anyone to ever read it. I wouldn't even tell people that I was writing. I had downloaded an app on my phone, and...
Oh, so you were just writing on your iPhone,
yes,
your smartphone.
Yeah. My Writing Spot. It's a great app. You put it on your phone. It's got a great interface for different chapters, and you can move the chapters around, and then it'll sync up to a tool that then you can use on your desktop.
That's awesome.
But yeah, you can be in line at the bank.
And if a thought comes to your head, boom.
And it works perfectly, because so much of this story is growing up in Utah. So you drive past some place and you see some home that triggers some thought in your head, and instantly it can be part of what you're trying to tell. And so he was an inspiration, but then it also became sort of people bouncing off of him. And the one thing, in addition to his just carelessness or boldness about life, that I liked about he and his friends, and that for me was so great about becoming friends with them in high school, is that because they were misfits, they didn't live in that world of, I'm afraid of the provincial judgment of the status quo. They'd already rejected it. So then if you do that as someone who lives within the status quo, and you are willing to say, no, It's okay. I'm going to let you call me this. Or you can attach these labels to me, but they don't really fit. And if you can get away from that fear at 16, it can be pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So one of my characters in here, I wanted her to be someone who completely rejected it, who came to Utah from out of state and looked around and saw the way that we judged each other and said, I'm not playing. And so my character Annabelle, who I think is one of the dominant characters throughout that, really takes that on and takes that seriously, but then does it so much that as an adult now she's struggling with, how do I go from my adolescent self, who was really bold and on the edge and trying to chart my own course, and now I find myself attracted to very traditional things. She falls in love, and she falls in love with this man who has 2 children, and she's struggling with, how can I be who I was, this wild, bold, in-your-face, burlesque dancer, shock jock, and then fall in love and move to suburbia and have 2 kids. And so she really struggles with that, where her best friend grew up within the dominant culture and was always raised to grow up, go to college at BYU, wait until you're married to have sex, and then raise 4 babies. And so her best friend then struggles with, what if you grow up and you do everything you're supposed to do and you're not happy? And
Which happens to so many people here. It's
such a part of the experience. When you get married at 19 and you haven't done anything and you've never left the state, and then all of a sudden at 24 or 34 or 64, you start asking, what did I miss? Or did I make these decisions intentionally, or because there was so much cultural pressure to make them? And then in between, I have a person who, Kira, my character, who had no direction, comes from this very dysfunctional family and was just trying to fly under the radar, and now is out in the world without a net. And so how does she sort of figure out who she's going to be when it isn't that she's afraid of the judgment, it's that nobody even told her that the judgment exists or how to navigate that.
Yeah.
And so to look at those ways that we label people here in Utah and show the inside of it too, that no matter how you're labeling someone, what their actual experience is very different.
Yeah. So how much of the book would you say is based off of your own personal experience versus just kind of thought up ideas of Utah?
So everything is a slanted part of a reality that I've known.
Yeah.
So there were 2 homes that growing up we would walk past in order to go to a park. And I always loved these 2 houses. They just always sparked my imagination. There are these 2 pioneer homes that are right next to each other up near Wasatch Boulevard. I grew up at the south end of the valley. And one of them had horse property. And then the other was this sort of sandstone pioneer house, but they've been there forever. And something about them just spoke to my 12-year-old brain, and I always liked them. And so those homes are actually homes of characters in the book. They're part of Utah to me. Anyone who grew up in Sandy, they would see a picture of that house and they know exactly what it is.
About, yeah.
Yes. And so that is the neighborhood where huge portions of the story take place. But I never lived in either of those homes. Mm-hmm. Or one of my characters, Sarah, who grew up in Utah, ends up being a flight attendant. And she is actually flying on September 11th. And I was a flight attendant, but years before. But I had such a great experience having that, going out and seeing the world. I've been a person who's always had severe wanderlust.
I love it. Yeah. Just to free travel or get out there and experience things. Yeah.
For me, there is nothing greater than just being dumped in a city that you don't know. And my map reading skills are piss poor. And so some people...
Just getting lost and discovering a city.
That's exactly it. Some people would think, I travel a lot and I can't read a map. Maybe I should learn to read a map.
Yeah.
But for me, it's I travel a lot and I can't read a map. And that's where the adventure comes in. And just seeing what will happen next. I'm one of those strange Utahns who has actually moved away a number of times and I keep coming back.
Oh, no, that's not strange. That happens to all of us. We all find our way back.
Yeah, it's interesting because you not only have the weather that you really can't beat anywhere else in the world. If you grew up in Utah, you become a humidity baby. Like, if it gets at all humid, I can't tolerate it.
See, and I like the humidity. I like the humidity a little bit. So it's this dry heat bugs me. I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah, but I I've always loved that, getting out and being unfamiliar and getting kind of roughhoused a little bit by the universe. And you have to figure things out. And for years in between the college experience where you're writing academically and the childhood experience where you're writing these ridiculous stories, I thought I was going to write travel articles. And so we'd go on this great adventure, and I would get home and I'd write 2 paragraphs, and then they were so boring I couldn't even stand to read them. But I had all of these paragraphs of all of these places I'd been in the world just sitting. And as I was writing this book, I started thinking about, I want this character to have the experience of walking the streets of Beijing. Because what happens when you take a little blonde girl from Salt Lake City, Utah, and you dump her in Beijing? And so that was a real experience that I had had, but the character who's going there isn't me. And, I went there with an expense account and a return ticket home. And I had a safety net, where she's going there as this person who is all on her own and she'd better make it work. And so to just slant that experience a little bit would change the way you looked at Beijing. I have this same character ends up in Paris. I've had the good fortune of being in Paris a few times, but I'm always there as a tourist. So, you stay at the very nice hotel and you leave your hotel and you eat at this little touristy restaurant and you go and you see the sights. But I've never done what would it be like to wander through Paris if you lived here? And so doing that research and calling my girlfriend who lives in Paris and talking with her about, well, what type of neighborhood would this type of woman live in? She moves to Paris actually as the lover of a wealthy married man. And he wants her to be closer to him. And so he moves her to Paris. So where would that woman live? And if she lived there, where would she eat? And so going back and forth with my girlfriend and looking at the menu of these restaurants and what's the metro stop she would take, and really building that experience and then combining it with things that I've had. I lived in Chicago for a little while. I actually, again, silly blonde girl, found an apartment in the Chicago Reader, which is kind of like the City Weekly equivalent in Chicago. And so there are ads for roommates in the back of the magazine, and I'm just doing this all online in 2000, 2001. And there are no pictures, but I found some ad, 2 college girls looking for a roommate. Great, this will be perfect. The rent is nice. Turns out it's right in the core of the south side of Chicago. So the street I'm on is nice and it's clean and it's very close to the University of Chicago. But one street over, you go buy chicken, you have to put your money in a turnstile and then they put the chicken out for you.
Wow, that's awesome though.
Yeah, day 2, I'm there and I get on a bus to go right into the city, and 2 men get on the bus and they flash some signals back as they're getting off the bus. But I think nothing of it until all of a sudden, pop, pop, pop on the bus. And I look around and everyone else on the bus knows, like, get down on the ground. But little blonde girl from Utah, I'm thinking we've got a tire blowout. So I'm just sitting there looking around like, what's going on? Why are we on the floor? There had been some gang violence, and these other men who'd been standing at the bus stop had shot at our bus. And then we got pulled over, and it was some 3-hour ordeal to talk with the police. And
so did bullets come in the bus?
Bullets came in the bus. Bullets shot through the window of the bus, and everyone else on the bus had the good sense to know
to duck. But you're just sitting there like, what's going on over here?
Yeah, I mean, it took me a minute to even realize anything was happening.
That doesn't really happen in Salt Lake, you know? That doesn't happen here.
You don't have that knee-jerk, I'm being shot at when you hear loud sounds. Mm-hmm. I thought it was, something wrong with the bus. It didn't even occur to me to look down. And I wanted my character, Sarah, to have that experience of just getting out of Utah and seeing the world as a bigger place, so that then I knew I was going to bring her back to Utah later, but I wanted her to have left Zion because so many of us don't. And, living here, that there's the culture of the people who've left and the people who haven't, and that there's an assumption if you don't leave that you never have that experience of realizing how great it is when you come back. That you can go out and you can see so much, and all of the things that you love about everywhere else in the world, you can come back here and you can find. And I wanted her to be able to have that independence as a character, so that then when she came back and made very traditional decisions, she was doing it with a more
an open
perspective.
mind and yeah, global perspective. Now the book's been out for a couple of months now, right? Is that when did it come out? Like May, I think. I was
So
reading.
the book came out in the spring. It was actually in January.
Oh, January. Okay.
It went to the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Awards. Originally I didn't tell anyone I was writing it. It was just for me. And
So you kind of surprised some people.
I surprised everyone. Yeah. Well, part of when I was writing it just for me, and it was really this exploration of what it would be in Utah if you lived without judgment from this one character's perspective. And then I wanted this character who got to be bold and brave and fearless. And then these other characters who sort of, I felt, evened out the group. And I just let the horses run because I was writing it only for me. And then comes in my Dr. Ruth background where I've always liked trashy fiction. I think I love a good trashy romance novel. And it's interesting to me that people can write about heartbreak and they can write about war and they can write graphically about war.
Yeah.
And that can still be considered literature. But sex is just as much a part of the human experience.
But it's dirty.
So it can't be literature.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was, as I was writing this book, I'm exploring these very political themes. And if you want to make people uncomfortable in a room, you talk about Jesus or you talk about feminism. Nobody wants to hear about either of those. And so as the book was evolving, it felt a little too political. And so I wanted to balance it out with a little bit of sex.
Yeah.
That
well,
you
why
can
not? Yeah.
that you can have these strong, independent, intelligent women who go through the feminine experience, who also are women and enjoy that female experience. And so it was dirty. It was a dirty book, but with a political theme. And I heard about this Amazon Breakthrough Novel Awards competition. And I was too nervous about the book to tell anyone I had written it. So it's written and it's done and it's sitting in my computer. And I had written it in order to, like I said, I wanted to have this other version, this alternate reality of this friend who we had lost. But I didn't dare share it with anyone because it was also so dirty and had these political rants that then I was like, do I really want to have to talk about this with the guy in the IT department?
So what happened when they found it?
Here's this competition. And I submit the book in the competition, but I actually write under a pen name.
Okay.
And the pen name is actually my grandmother's name, which of all the people who would love that I wrote a dirty book under their name, it would have been her.
Was she a fan of dirty books?
No, she was the sweetest little primary teaching white-haired old lady.
Yeah.
But
she would have been proud of you.
She would have been proud.
Yeah.
If I had told her, hey, guess what? I wrote a really dirty book, she would have just loved that I wrote a book.
Uh-huh.
So I put it in this competition, and now it starts doing well. And then it gets to the end of the competition where in order to advance, you have to now get people to vote for your book. So I'm at this real struggle that I wrote the book and actually I don't have a problem with any of the things I've said in the book. I'm actually okay with all that I've said and all that my characters have done. But now I have to go out there and be open about it to the world where some of the things people are going to read and they're going to wonder, is she talking about me?
Yeah.
Or is this a truth? Did she really do this? Or did this person really do this? It's going to make people ask
Well, it goes
all
back
of these
to
questions.
a beginning question of what is truth and what isn't truth and what experience and so on. Yeah, I
Right.
could imagine. That'd be tough.
It was a real struggle. But I started with my family, just my close family, and said, hey, I wrote this dirty book.
Hey, Mom, check this out.
Yeah. And
What happened?
it's interesting. So I told my parents and I sent my dad the cover art, which, the cover art of the book actually originally was a little sexier, but
Yeah.
it's a sexy cover and it says slut on the front.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's a great acronym. I mean, I love it. I love the Salt Lake, Utah slut, right?
Right.
Yeah. So you send him the cover. And what
So
happened?
I sent him the cover art and my dad, bless his heart, the next day walked around to everyone at the office showing him the cover art
Well, he was
and
proud of
telling
you.
everyone
He was
how proud he
of you.
was.
Yeah.
That of all the ways a family could respond to it, their response was just pride and support.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so having that, it was sort of, anybody who loves me enough that they're going to think,
me,
yeah. Well, anybody who has been close enough in my life to either think they're in the book or to think that something in the book is a truth for me will ask me. And the rest of you might just have a good story or might never read it at all. But again, if I'm exploring the topic of what if you lived a life where you weren't so worried about the labels, well, maybe I can try a little bit of that on myself. So I started with just kind of onesie-twosie telling people. And for a long time, just didn't have the balls.
But you had to get the votes, though.
Right.
So you couldn't wait around too long.
Right. You have to kind of play it. Like, how do I play it and how do I do it? And then I had this girlfriend from high school and I told her about it and she just outed me. She just went on to Facebook and she talked all about it and she put a link to it. And then it was like, well, I guess I have to be behind it. And a couple weeks later, some of the books came into the office and one of the guys from the office opened the box before I got it. And I walked into the room where there are 5 or 6 of them all sitting there and I could see a look on their face before we even start talking. Something's going on. And someone opens up randomly to a page and starts reading. And it was the most painful experience of my life.
I could imagine.
Well, and especially they opened it to a dirty page.
Yes.
Yeah. And I will, to give context to podcast listeners, Publishers Weekly called it squeamishly erotic.
Nice.
Which I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but I guess I'd rather be squeamishly erotic than boringly erotic. Yeah, so they start reading this page, and I'm dying of embarrassment. And then they pass it, and someone else reads a page, which is actually fairly political. And then someone else passes, and it reads a page that just takes place in Venice and is describing the beauty of Venice. And then this other girl was like, "Everyone, stop reading it! I want to get a copy." And that was when
you had some sales right there.
Well, and that was when I was sort of like, oh, okay, so yeah, some people think it's dirty, and some people think it's too dirty for them. And though some people randomly, they hear a little bit and they're like, you know what? I want to read that story. So I had to just get over it.
Yeah.
And
well, how dirty is it? I mean, for people listening, does it get pretty graphic?
So someone asked me, when you're talking about sexuality, what kind of words do you use? And
what kind of words do you use?
I use all the words.
Nice. Okay, I need a copy now.
Yeah. I let the horses run. Yeah. I fully said, how would this person be in the bedroom? And how would this person be in the bedroom with this person? And then created that universe. Because it wasn't written for anyone else to ever read it, just as much as I pulled out the creative pins on what is it like to wander through Venice, there's also a chapter in the book where this main character, Annabelle, is a burlesque dancer. And she finds it very empowering.
In Utah. A burlesque dancer in Utah.
Yes. Okay. She is in the book, I have her as a burlesque dancer at Mink's Lounge.
Nice.
Yeah. And she loves it. She finds it very empowering and she just finds it to be such a turn on. And then she has this boyfriend who is very much into the club scene in Utah. And after one of her sets, and this is chapter 2, this sets the tone of the book. Yeah. He walks in and the entire chapter is just this sexual escapade between the two of them. And I felt that I needed to start that way because it came right after a feminist rant from her where you think she probably is an angry man-hating lesbian. And she's not an angry man-hating lesbian. What she doesn't like is the way we judge female sexuality differently than we judge male sexuality. I'll read a little bit.
Yeah, let's read it. Let's do it. I want to hear it. Now, can people? You can get it on Amazon. It's not like on like any audio type books.
You can get it on Amazon. You can also buy it as an ebook for Kindle. You can't yet get an audio copy. I've been working on the audio copy, but I have to say some of the words make me uncomfortable to read.
I was going to say, get an audio copy with you reading it. But anyway, so go ahead. Right. Yeah.
Back to so right now, this is the very first chapter of the book. And these 3 women are having lunch at Bourbon House. And their friend has just died. And we have just discovered that there was a betrayal between the 2 friends years and years ago. But you don't really know what's happening in this chapter. And our character, Annabelle, the burlesque dancer, has been involved in a political fight with one of the local dominant culture political voices who at the time I was writing the book, slut shaming was really happening in this country. It was all of the debate with Obamacare as to whether birth control should be covered or not and how companies should be able to address birth control. And people were being very loose with the word slut. And so I wanted to address that. So back to the point. Slut has a horribly nasty historical context. Historical usage of the word identifies a slut as a dirty or unkept person of loose morals and virtue. In calling her that, you insult not only her sexuality, but her entire essence, her hygiene. She is now tainted by her sexuality. And we all think that of promiscuous women, of the vagina. We think that somehow sharing it makes it dirty in a way that we just don't hold against men or the penis. Somehow being the invader makes one above the laws of STD transmission. Bullshit.
I love it.
So when you start that, I felt that it was a little bit aggressive to start that way. But I wanted to get that out first so that then my characters could be as sexually self-aware as I wanted them to be and could take it as far as I wanted them to go. Because I'm creating a world where I, as the viewpoint showing you this world, I'm telling you that this book establishes a place where we don't judge women's sexuality, that these women get to have sex like men in this universe that I'm creating. So then I get to go into the next chapter and it's not, well, why is she doing this? And why is she behaving this way? Because you wouldn't ask that about a man. If you started out a book with a man having sex in a bar with some attractive woman, you just think, good on ya.
Yeah, exactly.
And some
high five.
High five. Good for you. And some people who read the book found that it took them a while to like this character because she was introduced so early in such a sexual way that their internal judgment went off before they even got to know her. That they felt really uncomfortable with her being so open with her sexuality. Yeah. And she's that way for the first half of the book. She's very open about what she wants to do and who she wants to be with and why she wants to be with them. And that sometimes she has struggles, but her struggles aren't sex guilt. Her struggles are being a woman and knowing that if I am with this person, oxytocin's going to kick in and my bonding hormones are going to come out and I'm going to think it's a relationship even though it's not. And that for so long, she tries to manage that natural way of being and to try to say, I know that my biology says that I should be this, but I don't want to be that chick. I'm not going to be the girl who falls in love with everyone I have sex with. And she really explores that. And then she discovers 10 years later that she doesn't like that way of being, that it's left her feeling kind of empty. And you could do that with a male character, but I wouldn't know how to do it with a male character.
Where you're the female writer.
Right.
So what's been the response? I mean, obviously it was good response with your family and whatnot, but outside of that, people buying the book. Right. I mean, have you gotten any feedback that way or any negative feedback even? I mean, has it been... What's that been like? So originally, when the finalists were announced in this competition and my book was on the list, and there was a little bit of chatter, and so on these forums of the authors who are involved in this competition, and real authors who have many books out and who really consider this competition a very important validation of their craft. And there was some chatter. So I just went on and I said, I wrote this really dirty book and I submitted it to this competition more just to get a little bit of feedback because I didn't dare share it with the world, but it would be great if a couple of writers would say, hey, you don't know how to use a semicolon. So I had put it into the competition expecting to get nothing but a tiny bit of feedback. So I went on to this forum and I said, it's really dirty and I'm really uncomfortable about sharing it with the world, but I'm also proud of the work. What do you think? And hundreds and hundreds of comments then poured in. Wow.
Some people who were saying, the Tropic of Cancer is dirty, but it's also part of the canon. Just because it's dirty doesn't mean that it's not literature. And then some people would get on and say, but it's not literature. It's not any good. Or then some people would get on and they would say, I actually don't see it as dirty at all. I see it as political and timely and topical. And one woman who just hated it, she continued to get on and she said that in writing the way I was writing, I was reducing women to being nothing more than a vagina, that I was setting feminism back 50 years, and that why am I not talking about the accomplishments of my characters or the intellect or the relationships? Why are they just a bunch of dirty-mouthed sluts? And the fact that people were getting so upset really reinforced to me how important it was to be having this conversation. Because if it had been a coming of age story of men from age 17 to 25, you would naturally expect that there's going to be sex talk.
Yeah.
You would hope that for them. So this woman kept talking about how offensive she found it for women in general. But the funny thing is, then she'd keep reading it. I just went and reread chapters 1 through 3. So then I kind of sat quiet for long enough, and my writer's brain came out, and I went onto the forum, and I actually wrote a dirty scene, her reading Slut over and over again, her fingers stroking the mouse, turning the pages slowly, and just had fun with it, and decided that the people who are going to judge it and the people who are going to be uncomfortable with it because it's dirty, first of all, they're not going to read a book called Slut. If they see a book in the bookstore, SL, UT, and they pick it up and they're offended, you kind of knew what you were getting.
That's their own fault, really.
Yeah.
Really.
So those who are going to read it, they know what to expect.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, Publishers Weekly said, that it was squeamishly erotic, that it was a great story and an interesting story, and then there was too much sex. And so
how could there be too much sex? Come on.
Whoever has too much sex in a book?
Yeah. Right.
So
the more the better.
I read through the book with that question. Is it too much sex? Is it, just like Mel Gibson violence pornography? Am I just putting it in there just for sex? And I never felt that I got to a scene that didn't belong. And so ultimately I decided, you know what? I feel that my characters would behave the way they're behaving right now. And I feel that in sharing them behaving that way, I'm being honest with the reader. And I also felt that it gave me leeway to explore some difficult topics that would otherwise just make the book a downer. And so I wanted it to ultimately be a fun piece about this great part of Salt Lake that we like and enjoy. And here are these people, and here are how they interact with this universe around them. And guess what? Even Mormons have dirty Mormon sex sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I wanted for there to be a real picture. And I haven't been getting negative feedback anymore.
Yeah.
Since that first
But I'm sure you expected it to a degree. I'm sure you expected, okay, I'm putting myself out there, especially in Utah. I'm going to get some negative feedback. So you had to have that thick skin.
I think I was too naive to even realize.
Okay.
Yeah, because it all happened so organically. At first it's just a couple of pages. And those first few pages were written for me and for my friend's mother. And then it became a couple of more paragraphs. And then it was, now that's just for me. And then a couple of more. And because it just kept growing so organically, I've sort of been catching up all along. And now I'm in the second book, which will resolve a lot of questions that were brought up in the first book, but I didn't give the reader a full resolution.
So you're writing a second book.
Right.
Okay, I was going to actually ask that if there was any more books in your future.
So there are a few pieces that are in progress right now. One is Slut 2.0, which is sort of the conclusion of all of this, and what happens when Annabelle falls in love and moves to the suburbs, and then Sarah, who's been living in the suburbs, is suddenly really disillusioned with that life, and how do we follow that? And my other character, who has gone to Paris and is living there as the kept woman to this man, what's going to happen with her, and how is she going to resolve things, and will she finally take her life under control? And so that one is in progress. I'm also working on a piece that is a thriller. It's a digital thriller, and it's called The Smoothing Algorithm. And that one has been a fun one, but it's an entirely different approach to writing, where Slut is so relationship driven and Smoothing Algorithm is really kind of a digital caper. The two protagonists are male, and trying to get into their head and trying to understand them and trying to make their motives for what they do be authentic and real, but I've never been a man. And they're both coders, so it also takes place in a universe that is not very familiar to me. So I'm doing a lot of research right now and a lot of story development. And then another piece that I'm working on a little bit that is a children's book. So they're kind of all over.
You're kind of turning into a full-time writer. I mean, would that be your dream to eventually do writing full time, or is it just are you just kind of doing it as a passion right now?
So once I started writing Slut and I had it on my phone and I could write all the time, I realized that the most important thing to writing is writing every single day. Even if you have nothing to say, if you just, if I look and I see your downtown Salt Lake City magnet and I write a couple of paragraphs about wandering through downtown Salt Lake City, it's a muscle. And if you keep that muscle strong, you can use that muscle regularly.
Yeah.
But as soon as I stop writing for a few days, when I get back and I look at the screen, I've got nothing to say. And so right now, I would almost say that it's an exercise I'm very passionate about. I don't want to look at the stories too much about what they would do commercially, because as soon as you do that, or for me, as soon as I do that, I get bogged down in self-judgment and fear and nervousness, where when I just let the story come out, regardless of what it has to say, and I just allow my fingers to move across the keyboard and my brain just kind of runs away, it's incredibly calming. Yeah. And I do better, and I'm more interested in what has to come out, because the worst thing would be to write something that I find boring, that I don't even want to read. So to say that I want to do it as a career, I think it is something that I would like to have be part of my life.
But it gets a little overwhelming.
It gets overwhelming. It becomes so much.
What if they were to make a movie out of this, though, or something like that? I mean, that would just be mind-blowing, right?
So a lot of people who read this, they called it a few things. They called it 50 Shades of Mommy Porn.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't mind that one. And they called it Sex in Salt Lake City with more sex. Yeah, so I liked both of those. And I think it would lend itself to the visual elements needed to be a movie or a TV show. And I think that the characters have interesting lives, and you could follow their lives and they could do interesting things. I think you definitely have to edit it if you're going to make it for TV. But I would love it but for me right now
you're just enjoying it.
I'm so excited anytime someone reads it, even if they hate it, if they tell me why they hated it, I can learn from that. And I love that. And I think I'm still so passionate about this book that anytime someone decides to read a little bit, it's like I got to share this little secret that I had. And so I would hope that I won't ever get far enough away from it for it to be impersonal to me.
Yeah.
So even if it just continues to have a little bit of a following here in Salt Lake, I'd be thrilled by that.
Yeah.
I am getting a lot of people who are saying, well, if you're going to call it Slut, then the next book needs to talk about the gay community in Salt Lake. Which I think there's something to that, because I right now it's just a bunch of women. And maybe if I did explore a little bit more of that part.
Well, there's
of
a huge gay community here in Salt Lake. And but again, though, if you're not familiar with that, it's hard to probably relate to that and write about that.
Right. Well, and if I really want to explore the way we judge each other's bedroom behavior, then that would be something that gets a ton of judgment attached to it.
Yeah.
I've never been a gay man in Salt Lake, so I'll have to do a little bit of research. But I think it could be a great topic to explore along this theme. And then I need to resolve what happens with Carrick and how that all comes together. So there are a lot of pieces that I'm still excited about. And right now, the book, for me, there are some things that I know I want to have happen, but a lot of it, the characters reveal to me as I write. So just as much as someone reading it will have these surprise moments, I get surprise moments still, where when I sit down, half the time, I don't know where my mind's going to go. And some song will come on my Pandora, and there will be some line that triggers some creative moment. And I might have been working on chapter 7, and now I'm going to jump to chapter 30 because there's some theme that has to come out. And I love that. I love that. It's awesome. So much fun.
Well, before we get wrapped up here, I always like to talk to people that I bring on, especially you. You lived in Utah a good majority of your life. Mm-hmm. Overall, what do you like about Salt Lake City? A little bit about the city itself.
Right. So for me, I think I always come from a place of, I think of Salt Lake, the Salt Lake I grew up in, which is a really big town. And I'm always surprised when I realize that Salt Lake is now actually a major metropolitan area.
It's growing.
Yeah. I remember the Bar X from where it used to be the place where your
dirty.
Drunk uncle went.
It was dirty. Yeah. Peanut shells all over the ground.
Right. The Bar X did not used to be the cool place that the hipsters went. The Bar X was the place that you hung your head before you walked in. And now I love it. It's a great place to be. And I have those experiences all the time. Eva's on Main Street. I walk in and I was there with some people from work, and most of them were not from in Salt Lake. And I'm like, oh, I love it when Salt Lake has cool restaurants. And they turn to me and they're like, Salt Lake is full of cool restaurants.
Oh, tons.
Yeah, where every time I find a new place that I feel is a world-class dining establishment, I fall in love with Salt Lake all over again. And then you go and you have funeral potatoes and ham rolls at someone's house on Sunday in Spanish Fork. And I love that too. And that you have that incredibly wholesome, incredibly family-oriented, if anything goes wrong, you've got 15 layers of people who will have your back. To then on gallery stroll nights, you can go over to Minx and you can see burlesque dancers and people posing in the nude and an entire artist community drawing that, and someone on the trapeze, and you can go to Onyx Fitness Club and you can take a pole dancing class, and then you can go 2 blocks over and you can see an entire primary group that's outside playing kick the can.
Yeah.
And it's that great
diversity.
Yeah, that beautiful, safe place to be. And then from that, you can go out and you can explore the world, and you always have that big, welcoming Salt Lake hug to come back to, that it's a little bit of everything.
Would you change anything about Salt Lake? Would you like to see, I mean, obviously the direction it's going, or if you could, I mean, is there anything you would change?
Well, I think there are 2 things. One, I would like to be able to bring back more of what we had in the 40s and 50s, where we had a vibrant Main Street and people walked from place to place. That because Salt Lake really boomed in the era of the car, we're so disjointed that, my family, we joke that anything south of 21st is Southern Utah. and that there is very much a disconnect, that there's Salt Lake and then there's the rest of the valley. And I would have loved to see Salt Lake grow a little bit more like your typical cities do, where your core grows and spreads out, where we kind of had the core grew and then collapsed, and then everybody went down south and built strip malls. You see that changing, and I think you're getting more density.
Yeah, downtown is getting more alive.
It really is coming back to life. There are all sorts of restaurants coming back, but so much also for so long developed at the south end of the valley in this great big sprawl scatter of a restaurant here and a restaurant there. And so to see that density coming back to Salt Lake, I love. And then I wish we hadn't torn down so many of the beautiful buildings.
Oh, tell me about it. Tell me. That's why I've tried to capture pictures of so many of them before they tore them down,
I love.
There's so much beautiful architecture in the city.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about that beautiful architecture took place sometimes 50 years after there was nothing here. Mm-hmm. And thinking about Salt Lake as really a very, very young city that developed, in the midst of nothing. And it was just people who were just working hard and making it happen. And then to destroy that so that you can put in a Sears. City needs a Sears.
Oh, yeah.
But I wish we hadn't torn down our buildings in order to do that. So I love it every time I see one of our beautiful old historic buildings being renovated, or one of the old historic homes being converted into apartments, or going from apartments to retail. I love watching the city change and grow.
Well, how can people find you online? Can people buy the book here locally at all in Salt Lake City? Can you find it at
So we're just starting to get out, or I'm just starting to get out into local bookstores. I hope to have a list up on my website of that soon. But right now, if you go to AlisonLeeAuthor.com, so just ALISON Lee Author, or Amazon, SL, Alison Lee, you can get it either one of those ways. And you can follow my blog at AlisonLeeAuthor.com as well.
Awesome. And I'll get all the links on the show notes as well, so people can check those out. And then you're on Twitter as well?
I am on Twitter, Alison Lee _SL_UT. So you can follow me on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, and hopefully, some people check out your book and drop you an email or something and tell you what they thought of it,
I would love to hear what people think. And if you have recommendations of awesome Salt Lake haunts that you feel are very literary, I would love to hear those as well, because a lot of the scenes take place in Salt Lake, great Salt Lake haunts that people wouldn't be aware of. So I'd love to hear from your listeners.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody, for listening to another episode of the I Am Salt Lake podcast. Thank you so much, Alison, for joining me on sitting down and talking and allowing me to get to know you a little bit better. And thank you so much for the book. If you guys get a chance, check her website out at AlisonLeeAuthor.com. Find out more about her, read her blog, find out more about the book. She's a great person and doing some really cool stuff here in Salt Lake City, Utah. IamSaltLake.com is a website. IamSaltLake@gmail.com is my email. Drop me an email. Tell me what you think of the podcast. I'd love to hear from my listeners. Love to hear what you guys think. If you would like to be a guest on the show, if you're doing something really cool, drop me an email as well. If you would like to help support the show, there is a link at IamSaltLake.com. You get free shipping on all of your Zag products. If you do any shopping through Zag.com, just click on that link at IamSaltLake.com. You get free shipping. They throw a few nickels our way and helps keep the podcast alive. You can also leave us a review in iTunes. That is much appreciated. Helps boost our ratings and gets us exposed to more people. You can also share this episode or any of your favorite episodes on your favorite social media site, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Pinterest, whatever social media sites you guys use. Feel free to share this episode with your family and friends that way. Or better yet, the old-fashioned way, just by word of mouth is much appreciated. So anyways, I'm here Monday and Thursday with a brand new episode showcasing locals, professionals, people in Salt Lake City. Until then, my name is Chris Hollifield, and thank you so much for listening to another episode of the I Am Salt Lake podcast.